You are listening to the Necropolis podcast, which is brought to you by Jason from Goatcraft and Shelley from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. So we are back with another ranking. This time we're super niche into the Canadian black metal. It will be Shelley and I, Roman from Into Oblivion, may be joining later today during the episode, and it'll be great to have Canadians' input on Canadian black metal. I've always thought Canadian black metal has been quite quirky and doesn't really conform to specific territorial type of sound. It's more of just really off kilter. Different types of expression coming out, and when you try to pin down Canadian black metal, it's more like pinning down like an ancient language where language evolves over time, and it's really hard to pinpoint the exact meanings of things and things of that nature. But anyway, Canadian black metal is what we'll be talking about. And before we do that, I do have some really sad news to present to the world. A good friend of mine, Aaron Mendiola, passed away a day ago. Aaron was also known as the Gore Growler. He played in quite a few bands as a vocalist. He played in Putrilage, engaged in Mutilating, and Exulcerate. He played in Exulcerate. But the thing about Aaron, he was such a central figure in the San Antonio metal scene. He put together a lot of the shows for Death and Black Metal. He was a big promoter. He threw the festival, the Gore Growlers Ball, for 5 years in a row, and the last one was really big and kind of bit off more than he could chew with that one. That's why he stopped doing the festivals. But he also had a little zine where he would interview bands and all of that, and he had the magazines up at Hog Wild Records, so people locally can check out bands that he would interview. And for the most part, he had a really good taste in extreme metal. He was obviously into the TXDM brutal style, but he was also into classics. And if you look him up on Facebook, he's wearing a Necropolis t-shirt. Personally, like I said, I've known him since I was 18. Is always really friendly, and he booked me. He was one of the first promoters to start booking GoCraft. I'd played with other bands, and he had booked them on his shows as well. And he was always just a guy who was there. He was just like the backbone of the San Antonio metal scene. So hearing about his passing has been really saddening for a lot of people, especially myself. But anyway, just wanted to give a quick remembrance. Do have a beer because he did love drinking craft beer. Not necessarily the beer I would drink, but I over the years I did have quite a few beers with him, and just really saddening to discover that he had passed away. I know a lot of people in Texas are mourning his loss, so hopefully I know his mom, he was taking care of his mom because she has Alzheimer's, and I can't imagine what she's going through right now with the brain disease and losing her son. So just wanted to give my respects to Aaron as we start today's episode on Canadian black metal. So Roman has also joined us. We haven't started yet, Roman. We do have the infamous Shelley from Hate Meditations, ruffling the feathers of many OSDM fans, and cherish Shelley so much for just being very objective with how he approaches music. Shelley, I want to thank you for driving today's episode. You put together a tier list, as well as choosing a lot of the albums that we'll be talking about today. Thank you very much, Shelley.
No worries. Glad to be here as always. Very, very sorry to hear of your loss there as well. I'm excited to talk about some Canadian BM today. I think to your point as well, it's like the thing that interests me about Canadian BM is because it got going in the later 90s, it does it branches off into a lot of different styles in terms of trying to carry the baton of where black metal could go after, the European scenes ran their course. So yeah, and some of these albums I think are kind of testament to that. So I'm excited to talk about some of them.
Me too. And we have the Canadian himself talking about this Canadian black metal, eh? Roman!
Hey guys,
How are
how's
you
it
doing
going
today, Mr. Roman?
Good. Thanks for having me back on, guys.
Yeah, no problem. Looking forward to your input since you're actually Canadian. And we have one of your releases on our tier list today.
Oh,
Who
okay,
knows where
cool.
that'll end up, but yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be fun to talk about it and pick your brain and how you approach your national kin here. Shelley, why don't you introduce the albums, and then we can talk about it. I guess we can rotate who wants to talk about it first. Like if you want to talk about something, you can jump in and then pass along the torch, however you see fit.
Sure, yeah. I should probably say like the selection process was a mixture of albums that I am already very familiar with, some research, and also I know Jason put some feelers out on Facebook to get some feedback on people's like favorite Canadian BM acts, and that's why the list is quite varied and serendipitous, I guess. But we did want to shine a light on particularly the war metal aspect of it all. So the first album we've got is Axis of Advance, the list, and Jason and I were just chatting before the episode, and Jason sort of mentioned that he wouldn't really cast this as a war metal album in the strictest sense. War metal being like an offshoot of the very early kind of Blasphemy, Beherit, to some extent Sarcophago, not quite so much, but yeah, that very early primitive kind of almost grinding black metal style that very much bypasses the Nordic kind of trebly tremolo atmospheric sort of style that became the hallmark of what black metal was by the mid 1990s. But Axis of Advance much more on the death metal side of things, I would say, and even as with some of the other war metal albums, a very striking hardcore influence as well. To my ears, particularly in the vocals, in that they veer from not necessarily the guttural death metal growls or the very, very kind of the banshee wails and high pitched screams of black metal, but more like the very kind of human screeching kind of sound that you hear in later hardcore, not like the early sort of 80s stuff, but yeah, by sort of the mid 90s, 2000s, that kind of I don't know. It's a vocal style that kind of grates on me a little bit. I associate it mostly with like sludge bands like Neurosis and stuff, but it's something that really kind of turns me off in terms of some of these albums, and vocals can sometimes make or break an album. But yeah, the Axis of Advance, I think it was one of the stronger albums from this style that we've got here in terms of the fact that it was much more varied. They tried to kind of develop some of these pieces a lot more. As I mentioned, they have a much more of a death metal influence. So there was a lot more kind of shuffles of tempo, shuffles of pitch. Some of the riffs were a little bit more developed than just trying to bludgeon the listener with, very, very basic sort of brutality. But yeah, not really my favorite style. So I think I'd take my rating with a pinch of salt, but I don't think I could rate it above like a C as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, Jason, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would definitely not rate it as a C. It's not average at all. So, Axis of Advance has always stood out to me as a very unique project with a lot of potential, actually. So, we were talking about a little bit about which album we would focus on, and I view the list as their most coherent album. Uh, we were going to feature Obey. Obey has a better production. It's more streamlined in a lot of different ways, and there's also the experimentation that Axis of Advance is known for going on there. Just synthesizing a lot of different styles and a lot of different developments. However, on the list, I feel it's their most complete statement. That's why I chose this album overall. The production's kind of shit on it, but if you actually listen to the riffs are really fucking good. Now I do have some quibbles with like how the songs flow, and as you mentioned, there are tempi changes that seem to come out of nowhere. But I think it's just hallmark of the quirkiness of the Canadian style. To throw in a lot of different influences, and which includes tempo changes that might be abrupt. But
I liked that aspect of it. I like quirky tempo changes, but for me it didn't add up to much more than the sum of its parts, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I think you need to listen a little bit closer next time to the album because the riffs, even the slower riffs, with the abrupt tempo changes, they're really fucking good riffs. And I haven't heard any band that does it in the style like Axis of Advance does, other than like Into Oblivion in some parts where, there's just this over type of over quantity of just musical content. And granted, it's not the highbrow content or anything like that, but there's some really fucking interesting parts in some of the songs on this album, and some riffs that I just can't help but bob my head to. So it's a strong B from Jason. I think it's one of those albums that if this band had, really focused more and had some self-editing, as you would put it, it could be a territory if it was streamlined a bit, and if they really like found their own like expression. But as it is, it's definitely above average. So C is when we talk about like a C ranking, that's just average, and there's a lot of average on this list. But I don't think Axis of Advance is average at all. It has a war metal DNA, it has death and black metal DNA, and broadly speaking, it's Canadian black metal. This is Canadian black metal. It's like in its truest form. No, so the content itself is really good. I do have some quibbles here and there with the song structures and things like that. And we're talking about war metal. This isn't war metal. Like the songs are usually like 5+ minutes long. War metal is usually concise. Boom boom boom. Like we're getting up to Conqueror. They have like 2 minute songs. It's not.
Oh yeah, but you've got bands like non-Canadian bands like Titan Blood and Diocletian that write. They're technically war metal, but they write pretty long songs. Like I know the Canadian style, the style was kind of developed in Canada, and yeah, because it was an offshoot of grindcore, it was kept very very short and concise. But that's not a feature of war metal. I think it has developed into its own thing, and I credit to Axis of Advance for trying to write in the style in long form or longer form. I'm not trying to do it down, but for me, it just yeah, it had a lot of potential, but it didn't really build on it. But sorry, I
I
probably
think
should hand over to Roman before we carry on with this. But
I think there's very engaging development in some of the songs. Not all of the songs, okay? Like there are some fucking shit songs on the album, but the strong songs alone makes it above average for me. So definitely a strong B. Roman, what do you think about Axis of Advance?
Yeah, so I would definitely say this album, particularly because we're talking about the list, definitely I would agree on a strong B. There's a lot I could say about Axis of Advance. I think some of Canada's best material, to be honest. And personally, like this is an interesting album because, yes, war metal is this kind of supposed to be essentially black metal. Early raw black metal meets a lot of the grindy stuff. Like there's, I can see we're going to be talking about Revenge later, and there's a lot of Revenge that's basically just like old grindcore, like old Carcass and Napalm Death and stuff like that. This is probably the grindiest Axis of Advance album, I think. When you listen to Strike is, which by the way is my favorite one. Strike has the very long, the longer songs, a bit more of an epic style to it, I would say. Relatively,
There's a little bit of epicness. I know, especially what you're referring to is the first song off of Strike has like this. The tempo change happens. It's just like this really long-winded development. However, I think overall, I think the list is actually a stronger album. But go ahead, Roman.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's for me, it's the song development and like just the strength of the melodies and how they just kind of like they kind of sit and meditate on them a little bit more in Strike, whereas in the list it's a much more compact and concise statement. And I would say that yeah, in that way, it makes me think it's very grindy. The hardcore thing that was talked about earlier by Shelley also kind of goes along with that. Like you listen to like the Torture, for example, and like I don't know, the Torture that song's like really really grindy. It gets right from the get go. I don't really think this particular album's unique. They didn't really do this exact expression of the style before or after, because by the time you get to Obey, they're really playing up the doomy parts, and then Purify is also really underrated. Most people don't listen to that last EP right there. But again, like they kind of tend to emphasize like the doomier parts over there, whereas here the Doom sections are exactly what you were talking about earlier. These abrupt contrast in tempos. They're kind of like you just kind of throw it in there to screw things up, basically. But in a way that works. In a way where that just the sheer contrast is it's like just an explosion that comes out of nowhere, and it very much suits with it suits the style of the album. I think I also have to say, coolest album cover of all the Axis of Advance albums. I mean, it's just dystopian, apocalyptic hell.
Do you have your documents?
Yeah, I can't argue with that. It's an awesome album cover.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. Based on that, I will do as instructed and study the album further, and maybe I'll amend my ranking. But I will accept I'm outvoted here in terms of 2Bs versus 1C. So it'll B. It shall stay.
All right, where would you put Fallen Angel of Doom? I think that's S tier, Shelley.
Blasphemy. Fallen Angels. Well,
A tier, or are you talking about?
I would put it as an A. It's undoubtedly Blasphemy's best, and we kind of shit on war metal a lot on this podcast. I think we have in the past, and we did Gods of War on another episode. I think it was a black metal tier list for a particular year, but for this particular album, it's kind of the archetypical, not just Blasphemy album, but archetypical of this style as well, in terms of the ability to mesh grindcore with the atmosphere of black metal. It's a style that's been imitated to death by this point, so I guess listening to it with fresh ears today, it would sound relatively stale. But when you approached it back in the day, when it was when there was less stuff around like this, it was incredibly, almost like haunting in a way, because you have these guttural vocals that kind of outdo a lot of like the most monstrous vocals in death metal for just the sheer malevolence of it, but meshed with this utterly feral, lawless kind of grinding, dark atmosphere, just by these sort of completely disorganized riffs that kind of compound on each other. And it is kind of like organized chaos in a way, where the band seem to be completely losing time at points where they're just playing for a blasting riff and they're not really locked in at all, and then they'll suddenly cut out into a tempo change. It's like, oh no, they do know what they're doing, and they'll just cut into a simple beat or whatever. And that kind of ability to kind of control the chaos but kind of mesh it with this unique and quite eccentric dark atmosphere as well. There's these moments where they'll fuck with the vocals a little bit and add some weird effects. I really love like the ambient intro and a couple of other moments where they do these dark ambient interludes. And yeah, the Beherit comparison is really obvious. Beherit obviously took it in a far more surreal direction, but I think in terms of just Blasphemy being weird and aggressive and feral, this can't really be topped. And most of the imitators, they never really understood what kind of made this album so special. I think the real ancestor of this would be someone like Antaius, who they were much more developed as composers, but they really took the visceral kind of violence of it and realized that you do need to imbue that with a sense of very, very kind of sophisticated composition and atmosphere to kind of give it legs and give it a little bit of longevity. But that being said, I don't think I can rank it an S, because I don't return to it as often as I do someone like a Beherit, who would be the most comparable example, I would say.
Well, I would say it kind of has like a Dark Throne syndrome going on, where Dark Throne innovated a specific style and it was just copied to death afterwards. So there's like a billion bands trying to rip off Blasphemy and war metal. They kind of like there's Sarcophago and there's Blasphemy and Beherit. Those are usually the guys held up for war metal. And I know Marco Leo, and I understand like why some people think that's war metal. It's not really war metal. It's just Marco. Like he's has, like you said, a very surreal and intuitive type of take on music in general. Like even when he did electronic music, it is very intuitive and there's black metal in spirit. But I would rank it an S, just because it was like the, how many bands rip off the Dark Throne type of tremolo chord riffing and all that. I would say there's a billion bands who rip off Blasphemy, and there are some songs on Fallen Angel of Doom that I do revisit quite often. throughout the years, and they still hold up. So I think it's a timeless classic, Shelley. And even though it is fucking knuckleheaded as shit, it's fucking great. So, Roman, what do you think?
I would say strong A. Strong A is what I would say. I mean, the album kind of speaks for itself, and you guys have said pretty much. I mean, like, it's a classic for a reason. Would I put it up on the S tier level? I mean, like, almost, but I don't come back to it as much as the stuff that I would tend to rate as being completely S. But man, it's like, yeah, it's just complete unhinged, Black Death, war madness, and I mean, these guys basically, crystallized and invented the style as we know it. So, anyways, I'm just gonna give it an A and let what you guys have said and the album speak for itself.
Then an A it shall stay. 2 A's versus an S. Sorry, Jason.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that you give it an S. Not that like
it just it hits this expression that I like sometimes. Like yesterday, I was listening to Conqueror. On Friday, driving home from work, stuck in traffic on repeat. Kingdom versus against Kingdom on repeat over and over and over and over, just blasting it in all the traffic. So. It scratches an itch for me.
okay.
I like knuckleheaded shit. So what can I say? I'm not.
No, I'm not. I fully respect anyone that wants to rank it an S. It was more of a. I think I've heard you sort of play Blasphemy down in the past, but I
just
absolutely think.
Well, I do think it's fucking stupid as hell, but it's good kind of stupid. It's like I'm not going to go into controversial territory saying things, but I just like it. I understand why they can't tour in the U.S. because their criminal record. So it's just really knuckleheaded shit. Yeah, can you pronounce the next band coming up, Shelley? I have no idea how to pronounce that.
Csejthe. So, they're named after the castle where Countess Bathory allegedly tortured and bathed in the blood of all of these virgin women. And I specifically know this name because there's a really cool, obscure Swiss band called Mordor, who are like halfway between Dungeons and Funeral Doom, who have an album called this, where it suggests. I mean, Hungarian is a really difficult language for anyone to master that doesn't speak that or Finnish, I think. But anyway,
Really, how do you pronounce my last name?
sorry,
Do you know how to pronounce my last name?
your last name.
My last name's Hungarian. Do you know how to pronounce it?
Your last name is Kiss.
Quiche.
Well,
Oh,
wait,
quiche.
wait a second.
Pronunciation is quiche.
I thought you were Czech or something.
I am. What? Well, the Ancestry.com, I think, is lumping in my Hungarian heritage as German.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well,
yeah.
I'm sure we can get into ethnography at another point right here. That would be.
Well, Attila from Mayhem, he's the guy who told me how to pronounce my last name.
Oh,
Was
okay.
yeah, a long story. But Countess Bathory's, which is Hungarian, she bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youth. Why are women obsessed with? It's like I want to look pretty all the time, even when I'm old. I have no idea why they do that, but women,
Jason,
women,
how long are we into the
women,
episode?
women.
You got to say something nice about women. We're only
Are
20
they
minutes
real?
in.
I'm joking. Shelley.
So,
I'm just saying, it's like, how do you know what a woman really is because she wears makeup all the time? Like, it's like she's putting on a face she wants the public to perceive, but not her actual face. So, but yeah, Countess Bathory, she tried to retain her youth by killing virgins and bathing in their blood. Some legends say it was up to 1,000 fucking virgins that she killed. I think it's more in the
and that's
hundreds.
why Jason
That's right.
hates women.
I don't hate women. I like women. I like women. They're a good part of our society, and they have the privilege to vote nowadays, and we respect that privilege that they have.
Thanks for clarifying that. What do you make of this album? So for me, I had not come across this album before we started prepping for this episode. For me, it was like a really quality, neat iteration of very, very slow melodic black metal, kind of like what some of the better Swedish bands are doing, but just slowed down to like 120 BPM or slightly slower. It didn't blow my mind in terms of like the melodic shapes they were drawing out. It was a little bit poppy at times for my kind of taste, but in terms of like just trying to do a form of kind of like lyricism or vocalization through lead guitar riffs, I think you could do a lot worse. And there is a lot of black metal that kind of pulls on that. I wouldn't kind of say it was folk black metal, but a lot of the melodies did remind me of like they echoed sort of European folk contours in a lot of ways, but they kind of developed it and melded it enough into a more like lo-fi black metal setting that it didn't feel like cutesy or like quiche or anything like that. Kitsch, sorry. So yeah, for me, I mean, I've given Access Advance a C, so I probably should write. I mean, yeah, if we're saying C is average, I think we can't do in-betweeny ratings, but for me it would be around a C. So yeah, your visceral hatred of women aside, Jason, what did you make of it?
I don't have a hatred of women. Come on, bro. Like, I do have quibbles with women because I've had failed relationships. Okay, that's where it all derives from.
Sorry, Jason, I don't want to exploit your trauma. Let's talk about the album.
Yeah, it's my own fault. It's really what my disgruntledness with the perception that I might have issues with women is because I falter here and there with choosing partners who I have a Schopenhauerian view of women where when you get married or
You
you're in a
don't finish that sentence.
relationship,
I
no, you have your rights and you double your responsibilities, and I do believe that's true because you're always having to focus on the lady to keep her happy and all of that. And meanwhile, I would just like to talk about Canadian black metal, drink some beers, and I have no issues with women. Come on, we're just joking, but
yeah, sorry, I am teasing. Let's talk about this album.
yeah, it's a weird episode. It's like we're not misogynists. um, but yeah, the Mort de Prince Noir. Um, it was fucking basic as shit. I mean, there's obviously coherence to the way they wrote their songs, and it's very like average. I would agree with the C. The riffs are very generic. Nothing really original about it. There, there's like this type of like a melodicism that a lot of bands tend to do, and I think it's because they don't really know like music theory or anything like that, or classical music to really expand like the expression. It's a very basic type of melodicism that a lot of guitarists do, and that's really I you listen to it. It's inoffensive. It's just kind of there, and yeah, it's very average. So yeah, C. I don't think it's D territory. I mean, it's basic, but it's I don't know. Maybe it should be a D because it is so basic. Roman, what are your thoughts?
This is one that I did not get to, so that's going to have to be between you guys.
Okay, I'm going to put it as a C then, just because Jason was on the fence, and I do think it was basic, and I do get that a lot of the like melodic construction was really obvious, but I think I've heard a lot of albums that tried to do a similar thing and do it way worse, so I kind of appreciated the fact that there was a little bit of creativity behind it, and it did not annoy me, which a lot of albums of a similar kind of style do, with this plodding, mid-paced kind of black metal where they're trying to foreground the melody over what I'd call the architecture, I guess. Yeah, if you know, you know. So moving on to, I guess, one of the bands that everyone is waiting to talk about with Canadian black metal, Conqueror. I guess the thing that we're kind of dancing around here, and the thing I mentioned before we started recording, was the thing I find really interesting about Canadian black metal is it kind of picks up the the mantle after the European scenes had kind of run their course by the mid to late 90s, and a lot of the bands had either kind of abandoned black metal entirely, or they were becoming heavy metal versions of themselves or parodies of themselves. And Canada, along with places like Russia and Ukraine and Eastern Europe, really kind of carried on what a lot of the Nordic bands were doing. And as we mentioned, particularly with the war metal side, there's the big Finnish kind of element there. We haven't mentioned Pale Nazarene as well. We probably should have done in that because they're a big factor in that. And to some extent, the French style as well, the really kind of abrasive, lo-fi, visceral stuff that La Legion Noir were doing. And Conqueror are kind of like a symptom of that in that late 90s, like, how do we make it more extreme? How do we make it more feral, more misanthropic? And I guess this album was kind of the result of that particular conundrum. And I kind of see it as like a combination of making black metal even more antisocial and aggressive and visceral. But also in the late 90s, you had a big trend towards like cybergoth. So you had like the Zyklon B EP, which is kind of like a forerunner to this. The Matrix had come out in like 99, and a lot of bands like Thorns and things like that were sampling the Matrix, and they all kind of ended up wearing leather trench coats and wearing sunglasses and kind of holding guns in their promo shoots and stuff. And obviously, like, the internet was becoming a thing in every home, so you had these like geeks kind of hanging out at home, spending a lot of time on the internet. And black metal kind of took on this futurist aesthetic to some extent as well, and lots of bands were experimenting with trying to meld industrial with black metal in some way. Conqueror, I'm not trying to put all these things in the music themselves, because musically they are almost as basic as Blasphemy, although I do see like the hardcore influence in this album, as I mentioned earlier as well. But in terms of like the aesthetic that they were trying to get across and just be more of one particular element of black metal as was, that's kind of how I view them. And I appreciate it more in theory than I do in practice. In practice, I find it, again, a little bit tedious and a little bit boring. But I appreciate by like 96, 97, if you're within a black metal scene and you're trying to add something to the dialogue, it would have looked like, well, this is probably our only option. So I appreciate them trying, and I don't think they pulled it off. I think other bands maybe pulled it off a little bit better. But for me, like, yeah, I've got to give a tip of cap to it. But I'd probably put it around a B in terms of my actual ranking. So I'll just throw that in there and then.
I agree with the B. So, like I said, I was jamming Kingdom Against Kingdom the other day. Really great fucking song, even though it's one fucking riff, but it's sheer primitive barbarism. And really good stuff. And it's entertaining for what it is. Like Conqueror, you have Jay Reed involved, and he was a cult of personality. And they also had like the black metal skinhead movement up in Canada. Perhaps you can expand upon that, Roman, for us Americans who may not have been involved with that. But there was a lot of people who had like Conqueror patches, and it was like this, like, not like a biker gang or anything like that, just like this specific war metal type of creed that a lot of people adhered to. But I think the album overall is not bad. It's not average, above average. And they also had a Ryan Foster in the band. He was also in Blasphemy, the later incarnation of Blasphemy, touring with them. So yeah, there's like definitely Canadian war metal to the fullest extent. I think it's better than Revenge. I know we haven't gotten to Revenge yet, but you know, we talk about Kingdom Against Kingdom being a great song. Blood of My Blood is a great song by Revenge. But yeah, I agree with the B. I think Blasphemy did the war metal style better. Jay Reed with his drumming is fucking crazy as hell. Great fucking drummer. And Roman, like, what's all that Canadian black metal skinhead stuff about? I know it's not like we talk about skinheads. We're not talking about racism or anything like that. Like the skinheads in England, for instance, there's a lot more like super progressive types that are skinheads, like in the punk scene, than like actual like white supremacists or anything like that. That's the way I always perceived it. It's more like a punk thing, where it may just be like this little fucking clique of like punk metal, crust, whatever type of people. What are your thoughts on that, Roman?
Yeah, okay, so first off, I'm just going to rate the album, and then I'll get to the other stuff in a minute. But yeah, I would give this a solid B, like a strong B, because I'd probably rate it about around. I like Conqueror about as much as I like Acts of Advance, generally speaking. So using that as the barometer, that's about right. I love how blockheaded and stupid and primitive this album is. I remember I was like 19, and I think that was the first time I heard anything from Conqueror, and it was the song Bloodhammer. And that, oh man, the riffs in that song are aggressively stupid, and they get stupider as the song goes on. Like, it's like kind of starts off like da na 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 ta 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 ta, and then there's like there's one I don't remember where it is later on, but it's like it's just it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's knuckle dragging, knuckle headed. It's really great. And I would also agree with the same comment about Conqueror. Yeah, generally speaking, better than Revenge, though. The cool thing Revenge ends up doing later on is like the slow parts or the groovier parts or whatever. But Conqueror is more like the songs are more cohesive, and it's more fresh and original when War Cult Supremacy is put out. So yeah, I love this album. Solid B. It gets kind of even some of the riffs get a little bit more sarcophago and a little bit black death metal as opposed to just straight like grindy stuff when you get towards the end with stuff like Dominator, Invectus, and Command for Triumph. But getting to the black metal skinhead thing, I mean, that's like I believe that phrase was originally coined by Blasphemy, and it was on some of their merch. And I think the whole thing was just that. Well, yeah, again, like you're talking about there, like, skinhead is like, that's really more of like a fashion music culture thing more than anything, and it became associated with politics. Well, depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on, it's like.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, I saw, when I was in London, I saw skinheads, and they're not like racist at all. They're just like punks. And that's just like how they dress, and they're really progressive.
Right.
So yeah, when you see like someone who says they're a skinhead, doesn't actually mean right off the bat that they're white supremacists or anything like that. It just
no,
musical culture that they're a part of. Now, granted, if it doesn't involve music and they say they're a skinhead, then it might be a white supremacist or something like that. But I always kind of viewed it kind of like the English skinhead scene there, where there's. Like, Shelley, maybe you can expound upon this too. Like, skinheads there, it's more just like a culture of the music rather than a blatant political statement, correct?
Well, just to finish off what I was going to say here, I'll just go right ahead because I didn't quite finish the idea. Essentially, I think with the case of Blasphemy and like Canadian war metal, it literally just comes back to the fact that, like, I mean, let's think about metal around that time period. Most people weren't shaving their heads. Most people had long hair. In black metal, death metal, thrash, whatever, it was kind of an uncommon thing to have a shaved head unless you were in the hardcore or the punk scene. So I think that was just kind of just kind of their way of like differentiating and demarcating themselves from other people in the scene. And Blasphemy did that, and then that just kind of became a thing that other bands ran with that were influenced by Blasphemy.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and it kind of calls back to the aesthetic. I mean, I was just talking about more in a trivial sense of like the broader cultural trends of the late '90s, early 2000s, where there was still like the dedicated core of metal who stuck with the traditional kind of aesthetic and look of having long hair, leather jackets or whatever. But then you had, the followers of kind of later black metal that started doing, it was very closely linked to the cybergoth thing, but it was also carrying over from hardcore punk, and it was, as Roman said, like, it was a way to differentiate yourself, and you still see it, like, it's a standard look within metal is to shave your head, and sort of wear sunglasses. It's like it kind of indicates what kind of music that you might be into or what your band might be. But also, to speak to Jason's point, the skinhead thing in sort of mid to late 70s, they were, being a skinhead, wearing a certain kind of denim jacket, and braces and Doc Marten boots did mean that you were probably a far right, like fascist. But the ironic thing is, they all really, really enjoyed reggae music, and they never really squared that circle. And if you watch a film like This Is England, it kind of goes into that in
Yep.
quite a lot of detail in terms of the fact that it was at a time when there was a lot of people from India and Pakistan moving here, and a lot of people in places like London, places like Bradford, Leeds, Manchester. They were struggling to sort of integrate properly, and they were struggling. The white local, like working class white population, was struggling to kind of reconcile themselves to that. But at the time, reggae music was getting really, really big, and also by extension, ska music, which obviously was an offshoot of reggae, and it was kind of like one of the great ironies of that. But also the far left kind of tried to appropriate the skinhead look, and that's why you get a lot of hardcore punk bands that were on the far left that started shaving their heads and doing the same fashion, and it was quite hard to tell. Short of like one of them wearing like a St. George's cross or tattooing it on their forehead, it was quite hard to tell when you saw a skinhead whether they would be on the far left or the far right. These days, it more means that someone will be on the far left, because far right people don't tend to signal their political allegiances quite so visibly, at least in the UK anyway. So when you see a skinhead, they will be part of the hardcore punk scene, and they will usually be either an anarchist or a Marxist or something. Well, maybe not a Marxist, because they don't read as much to be a Marxist. But anyway, let's move on to a slightly less political band. We have covered these guys. I'm going to again pronounce their name really terribly. Délétère.
Délétère.
Délétère. So we covered these guys on the roundup of 2023 because they were one of my picks. Not this album. This album was released quite a few years ago, but their latest album was one of my picks. And Jason ripped it to shreds because he was not a fan. This album, I think, is a much stronger album, to be fair, and it is. Their take on black metal is something that I do appreciate, but again, probably more in an academic sense, and it speaks to the other arm of what I perceive anyway, and kind of my limited knowledge of Canadian black metal, in terms of it consolidating a lot of elements of the Northern European black metal scene. And Délétère are one of the later kind of iterations of that. They didn't form until the late 2000s, I believe, and this album is only a few years ago, but it transposes the more high melodicism, not the melodicism of Csejthe or whatever, but it is slightly more sophisticated than that, slightly more bracing, a little bit of a Swedish influence going on, where they go much faster, they pack a lot more like dense kind of sentences into their kind of passages. The riffs are there's much more going on. It's very, very frantic as well. It doesn't quite get there in terms of making a coherent statement, but I kind of appreciate the fact that they are one of the few bands that really does engage with that kind of quite adventurous, heroic kind of undertone that you get to the original kind of black metal wave from the early 90s to the mid 90s. And they carry that spirit, but I think academically they are still not quite there. And especially with the latest album, it's slightly less conversive in that language than this album in particular. So I think I would rank it as a B for me, but I get the sense that it's about to be ripped to shreds.
A B?
I think it's going to be ripped to shreds. I'm fully aware of what you're about to do this album, Jason, so just don't pull your punches.
Everything you said I completely disagree with, Shelley. So the parallel I drew with the style of it, the style of the riffs and how the music is shaped, was not Scandinavian or Northern European at all. It reminded me more of Nocmistium from the USBM camp, Nocmistium from Blake Judd and all that. I would give it a C. There's an issue with how straightforward it is. Some of the riffs are very compelling, but the way they're arranged, it's like pop music. There's riff, chorus, blah, 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 and verse, chorus, and it's just, when you listen to metal that's formatted like that, you think about like thrash metal, like poppy thrash metal, like Metallica or something like that, or Megadeth. Not black metal. I think it's very, very average. I think the riffs are compelling here and there, but the way the expression is, like the overarching expression, is definitely for the layman. Is definitely for C territory average. Um, I wouldn't say it's above average at all. I would say it's firmly embedded in average territory, and it's really strange that I reached a complete opposite type of reaction to how, like, what it reminds me of. It reminded me of Knock Mystium because they structure their songs the same way, and they have compelling riffs. It may not be the same style exactly, but I think it's more aligned to USBM, like Knock Mystium, than their any Scandinavian bands. Roman, what are your thoughts? And I'll start to pee real quick, but go ahead.
Yeah. This is another one I didn't get to right here, so can't comment. You guys figure that one out right there. Some of the ones on this list I didn't have a chance to get to, so that's one of them. So
That is fair enough. So I am driving, and Jason's just gone for a piss, so it's going in the B. And that is my choice because I am in control. So, the next album is actually one that I am less familiar with myself. Eclipse Eternal, Ubermensch, Evolution Beyond the Species. I was sort of down to the wire in terms of my listening prep for this episode. So I was listening to this literally about an hour ago. And the thing that struck me was kind of like a good version of what turn of the century Dimmu Borgir or Cradle of Filth were doing, or maybe even later ancient, in terms of the fact that it's quite unapologetically melodramatic and gothic and symphonic, but the actual construction of the pieces seemed a little bit more intelligent and coherent, and they'd thought it through in terms of not, as Jason said with the Délétère, is like not constructing it round verse, chorus, and maybe a big showstopper bridge, but there was more of a narrative going on, but it still struck me as something that is not sorry about the fact that it's being a little bit silly. I like the fact that it seems self-aware about that, it came across like it was being self-aware about that, but also it was not all that sophisticated as far as like some of the other releases that we're discussing on here are concerned. So I don't know, Roman, do you have any thoughts on this? Or
I mean, we actually, was it 2014, 2013? A long time ago, we Into Oblivion actually played a show with these guys. I think the other band on the set was Sylvis. And actually, that's funny enough. That's the show. If I'm remembering the right one. Oh yeah, Protocol played that one too. If I remember that show correctly, that's actually the show where I met Baron. And shortly after that, he asked me to join Cromwalk. So just kind of a funny little tidbit right there involving this band. I think your assessment's pretty correct, generally speaking. The impression I got, I don't know if I would necessarily say it's self-aware. I mean, to me, I think it's pretty just take it as it is, straightforward, serious in terms of that. But I think that I don't really have too much to add to what you said about it right there. I know that. Hang on, have they been doing much lately since then? I know they're still kicking around. I don't know what their style's like now, but I think you using the. Oh wait, no, they're not kicking. Oh man, Are you kidding me? That's weird.
Oh yeah, so their last album was 2017, but they broke up.
Yeah, but it's funny because
in 2014.
Yeah, okay. That's funny because it says last show was on 2014. The Hard Luck, man, haven't played there in forever. But they didn't release the album until 3 years later. That's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, with all due respect to them, obviously, but I wouldn't. It's not really my thing. I wouldn't rate it very highly personally.
Okay. I mean, I think a lot of it is sort of depends because this style, even for black metal fans, is not for everyone. So if you're not a fan of the style, then I guess it wouldn't rank very highly. For me, it was a tight, cool version of it, but for me, again, it's not my favorite in terms of like the way that I like black metal to be like presented. So I think I would agree with a C.
Which band are we on?
You're saying a C?
I am saying a C. Did you say B?
No, I didn't. I didn't actually give it a letter. I would probably give it an F, to be honest.
Is this Chris?
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah,
Is this Chris?
just not really. I'm just not really into it, you know.
Hey, is this Chris?
This is Eclipse. This is Eclipse Eternal, Jason.
Oh, Eclipse Eternal. All right. Yeah, I agree with enough.
Oh, okay. So, because I gave it a C, I'm going to put it as a D because apparently I do like this style more than the average black metal fan, and I actually know. I mean, I do fully admit that I quite like cheesy symphonic stuff now and then, and I think this was like a tight iteration of it. But as I said, like,
can I get my credit?
I think it's. Sorry, Jason, go on.
Yeah, I know this band. I didn't recognize the cover. That's why I was wondering if it's Gris or not. Yeah, I had played a show with this band when they played in San Antonio, and I met the vocalist up in New York at a festival up there, and he was kind of nice. Like, he recorded a video of me playing and posted on YouTube, which I think he's removed by now. But my issue with this band is that they have zero identity. It's like 1 foot in, like Cradle of Filth, 1 foot in, Dimmick Borgir, 1 foot in, like ripping black metal and all that. And when you listen to the songs, it's just this barrage of random influences. They have no identity. And then the thing that kind of keeps it together, quote unquote, and I say that very loosely, is that the vocal performance is all over the place. Like, he has so many different ranges to his black metal vocals. That's what you're listening to. It's like black metal performance of vocals more than music, and that's why I would give it an F. Like, you listen to it, the riffs, there's no like overarching like expression or like statement that they have. It's just like flavors they're going through, and the thing that really just packs it together into its own quote unquote statement is the domineering presence of the vocals. So that's why I would place it as enough.
So a funny tidbit right here that I can add in, it's like, because the vocalist, Overman, that he actually did the same thing with Into Oblivion when we did that show. He filmed a video of us playing live and put it up. So it's kind of funny that we got that. But it seemed to me that very much like the fact that the vocals seem very prominent, kind of was a sign of like the band was very much, his project centered around him. So I think he definitely wanted to get a lot of the vocals all over the place get going.
I will also qualify what I said in terms of I was listening to this less than an hour before the podcast, so I will move it to an F because my opinions are probably less formulated than you guys are in terms of not being as familiar with these guys. So an F it will be.
Well, I remember hearing them because I was playing a show with them, and I met the guy up in New York, and he shared his band with me, and I wasn't even impressed back then when I was a young strapping stallion. So next band.
Next band. Again, I'm going to butcher the French pronunciation here. Forteresse?
Forteresse. Yeah.
Forteresse.
Yeah.
Forteresse.
The R's kind of got a roll from the back of the throat right there, I think.
Forteresse.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm familiar with these guys. They're one of the silverbacks of like Canadian black metal. It's just I don't meet many people that listen to Canadian black metal, so I don't hear these words pronounced out loud as with many black metal bands. And this is the kind of iconic album in terms of that style of Canadian black metal that I keep referring to. That's not the war metal, but it's much more aligned with the melodic, frigid kind of Nordic style. And yeah, obviously with Canada being where it is, like there is a clear like lineage with not just the music but also the landscape as well. And these guys kind of typify a lot of that. And I think this was 2006, so it's not like an early album. It's quite late in the day as far as like the evolution of black metal is concerned. But I think it's relatively early in terms of the evolution of this particular style within Canada, and it kind of sets the tone for a lot of what other Canadian bands would do, in terms of the fact that it lays out a very, very strong kind of sense of atmosphere and initially quite a strong melodic character. But for me, it just falls short in actually taking it anywhere. It's like a series of suggestions or ideas, but it never really says, and here's the conclusion, or here's the development, and here's where we're going to take it. So it almost works more like ambient for me in a way, in terms of like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I can get immersed in the style and the vibe and um, the delivery of it. But as far as where they're taking it, there's no kind of resolution, or there's no development, there's no climax that it takes it to. So for me, I mean, it's not it by any stretch. It's not terrible. I've heard far worse as far as like this style of black metal is concerned. But for me, for that reason, it doesn't really reach above a B as far as like quality black metal. But it's like, I accept its place within the reputation of Canadian black metal as a whole, outside of war metal. So yeah, that's my initial thoughts. But go ahead, Jason.
Where would you rate it?
I would say a B.
No.
A weak B.
Why a B? I know you just gave your little spiel, but that doesn't make sense to me.
Because you gave Axis of Advance the B.
No, Excess of Revenge is way better.
Yeah.
There's something very deliberate about this band's sound that just irks the hell out of me, and that's because they'll play like typical like Dark Throne type of chord progressions, and on top of that they'll have like this higher register type of one note little melody going along with the chord progression, and that's like a trait that I hear in a lot of like post black metal, and it's just, I would give it a strong D personally. I think it kind of flirts with like post black metal, and there's nothing really original with like the Dark Throne clone riffing. There's so many.
I didn't get a Dark Throne influence from this, aside from the obvious. Like, I didn't get a sense that it was more Dark Throne than.
Well, I think
like,
it didn't because of the higher register type of flurry of notes they'll do, and it really doesn't convey anything good. And it really reminds me a lot of post black metal, because they use a similar style in all of those post black metal bands where you'll have like the simple chords, progression, and then on top of that you'll have the higher register notes playing, and that makes it pretty.
Yeah,
And,
I fully understand the thing that you're talking about, especially within post black metal. But I kind of feel like this, it anticipates it in a lot of ways, but it doesn't creak into that style quite as badly for me, because they always pull it back and they're not too emotive about it. They're more reflective and meditative rather than trying to do this hammed up like emotional catharsis. I mean, I'm not gonna defend my opinion on this album too much because I'm not that attached to it. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
no, a strong D, because I think they're flirting with post black metal, and that's un black metal to me. Roman.
I agree with the assessment of a strong D. Like, I can't fail it, but at the same time, like, this is a band that I know like a lot of people love this band, and I can see why. And there's some things it's got going for it. I mean, obviously, the aesthetic and everything is cool. The thing is that yeah, this is essentially like, when I listen to it, it just basically kind of feels like sonic wallpaper. Like, it's just kind of there. And it's not bad. It's not offensive by any means, but it doesn't really come out and grab me. I don't really think the songs develop properly, really go anywhere. I think maybe, I don't know, maybe this is a reach or whatever, but I think, yeah, it's not too dissimilar to, the post black metal comment was a reasonable one to make there. I think also just like some of the Russian and Ukrainian like flowing black metal bands like Druid, or maybe some of the Blazebirth Hall stuff even. There's a little bit of crossover with that style too, I think. But at any rate, I would at the end of the day just give it a, it's a D. It's not terrible. It definitely passes, but yeah, not that great.
Yeah, I think we're kind of pointing to the same thing. I definitely agree with the comparisons to Russian black metal. But for me, I again like that's why I kind of evoke the ambient comparison because I really like the vibe that it generates, but I fully accept that it doesn't take it anywhere, and that's why I would rate it any higher. But yeah, I accept that for some people that's a D because in terms of black metal, the what we're always looking for is the band that not only creates that vibe but also actually does something with it and takes it to a moment of crescendo or revelation or something, and
Mm,
that's the really difficult thing to get across. But it's really worth it when it does happen,
absolutely.
and that's probably the yeah, it's the problem with a lot of, as we mentioned, like post black metal as well. They just create the wash of texture, and it doesn't really do anything with it. So yeah, I accept that assessment. So this next album, Frozen Shadows, Dans les bras très immortels, or whatever. Oh God, I'm really butchering the French here.
Well, hang on. We had to learn that language here, so let me see if I can take a crack at the title again. I got to look at it right here. Dans le
Oh,
bras.
as an English guy, I do not have to learn French because we just yell English very loudly at the French and they hate us for it.
Mine's pronunciation's still going to be not good. Dans le bras des immortels or something like that. So, anyways, yeah, you have to do a lot of that stuff where you're pronouncing it from the back of your throat. But, anyways,
Dans les bras des immortels. I absolutely fucking love this album. It is kind of like a amalgamation of Immortals Pure Holocaust with Emperors in the Nightside Eclipse.
heck yeah.
Because yeah, it gets across that really, really ice cold, razor sharp riffing that you get on Pure Holocaust that's just completely chaotic, but it's sort of that organized chaos. It's not up there in terms of like Demonaz's riffing, which was just up there with like Deicide's Legion in terms of the sort of three dimensional complexity to it. But it does kind of reach for that. But it also, as I said, kind of interweaves this really, really what's the word, opulent kind of symphonics that just put you in there. They just place you in, as the name says, Frozen Shadows. Like it's one of those bands that really does kind of justify the name. That really does sort of place you in that moment, and just the combination of the barbarity of lo-fi black metal with the orchestration of what Emperor were reaching for in the mid 90s. And I think this is one of the few kind of echoes of that. I think this album was like late 90s, 99 or whatever, but it echoes that. And as I said, with a lot of these bands, it kind of carries the baton as far as like doing what the Norwegian bands are doing and trying to suggest a way to carry it a little bit further. Unfortunately, Frozen Shadows, they released one album after this, but they didn't really manage to develop on this idea any further than this. But I think it's one of those really cool like aftershocks of the initial explosion of black metal that you see in the late 90s and early 2000s. Just these little pockets that you get in places like Canada, other places in Europe, South America, Australia, where they're just little aftershocks of the initial explosion of black metal that kind of just zoom in on a particular facet of the classic bands and really kind of explore it to a great extent. So for me, this is probably one of the only S albums on this list, and then I'll just hand over.
It is. Wow. So I did rank it high, but not that high. So Frozen Shadows. This was honestly my first really engagement with them for doing this episode. I really enjoyed the keyboard integration that they have. Like I thought that was very thoughtful. When we talk about keyboards in black metal, it doesn't have to be anything extravagant, like like overbearing, like the a lot of the more mainstream black metal bands have to be. There's something that goes along with the music, and they really succeed in that aspect. Um, the songs, obviously, they make a lot of sense. There's a lot of coherence, and with their how the music just unravels. And there's a lot of thought in there with creating very thoughtful black metal. I would give it between an A and a B. The era that they came out with, like this came out in 1999. Uh, the Norwegian scene had done this style a lot better than they did. That's why I can't give it an S. Like obviously, there's a lot of Norwegian influence there. Um, the song durations, I would say, is really interesting. Like the how some would be longer, some would be shorter, and all that. And it's very narrative type of writing. But I wouldn't say it's like as strong as Emperor or Immortal or
I
Burzum.
tell you what, Jason, I've been with this album for about 20 years, so I will spend more time with Axis of Advance if you spend more time with Frozen Shadows.
Well, I gave it between an A and a B, and that's a really high ranking from Jason.
No, it is, but I'm just saying, spend more time with it.
Okay. And perhaps I should, but I'm just giving you my thoughts that I listened to it and I scribed down some notes, and I don't have bad things to say about it. I think it doesn't really have like its own identity, like like the Emperor does, and the Immortal and all of that, and I. I have a hard time rating it as an S just on first exposure. So I'll give it an A, okay? An A. Next to Blasphemy.
Robin.
I'm gonna give it an A as well. This is a excellent album. Excellent album. It's funny. I kind of wavered on a bit. I was almost going to make it a B, but then I'm like, and I guess the reason I had that reaction was because I'm looking at Conqueror and Axis of Advance, and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like more similar to stuff that I would write, whereas like the straight black metal isn't. But no, this is definitely better than any of those albums for sure. I would actually say probably. I mean, like, yeah, that's a good question how it compares to Blasphemy right there. But they're definitely an A, 100% an A. This, I think, the assessment of kind of like a mix of Immortal and Emperor is bang on. And this seems to be kind of like a trend that happens with some of the Québécois black metal, and I can see later on we're going to be doing Sorcier de Glace, and there's actually a little bit of overlap there in that I always felt, Sorcier de Glace was definitely had a lot of the Emperor influence and a little bit of Immortal. It's love this album, very good. I would actually even compare it a little bit to Cythereal's Nord. That's an album that actually has a similar kind of feel to it, but I think this one probably does it better. Aside from that, yeah, it's a great album. We have a poster of this up in the jam space, so that should
Oh,
yeah,
nice, nice.
that should say plenty about it right there. So I'd say A.
Awesome. Okay, no, I'll accept today. That is fine. Jason, do you want to introduce this next one? This is the Gris.
All right, F.
That's why I wanted you to go for it.
So, some of these albums I had never heard before, and Shelley recommended. It's like, here's some Canadian black metal. And granted,
Hey.
it's a great.
I didn't recommend them.
It's a
Frozen Shadows I might have recommended, but some of them were just based on research as to who the popular Canadian bands are.
well, some of these bands I went in with an open mind, and I try to be honest with my listening. It's like, okay, like what's all going on here, and like I initially thought, okay, this is atmospheric black metal. It's like, all right, we've gone down this path quite a bit, but then the slower tempi in the songs, and I say tempi, the I at the end of T M
Yes, doing your Latin properly.
is it means tempos, but
You could just say tempos.
Well, it's funnier when he says Tempe.
Yeah, it's yeah.
I'm thinking the product the correct word for tempos, quote unquote, is tempi in a classical music sense, but in Western harmony and Western music and all that. But so they fooled me. This was not atmospheric black metal. This is DSBM, and as such, if like depressive suicidal black metal should just kill itself. Like there are keyboards in here, and they're not horrible. It's just they do nothing to the music. It does not drive along the music at all. When I play piano and all that, and when I hear keyboards and music, I perhaps scrutinize it a little bit more than most people, and just they add nothing to the music. It's just like this high pitched choir shit. It's like, oh, this is drama, like this false type of drama building. It's like, oh, there it goes, and on to the next riff, and there's nothing to it. It's really fucking bullshit DSBM, and I did try to really honestly to listen to it, and thinking it's like, okay, there are some atmospheric black metal bands that do have redeeming qualities, and I did not find it in this band. It's all just DSBM bullshit, so that's why it's an F from Jason. Go ahead, Shelley.
Yeah, about the most insulting thing I can say about a band is I'd rather listen to Xasper, and I think I'd rather listen to Xasper. As far as DSBM goes, at least he leans into the depressive aspect and tries to do something quite interesting with ambience, whereas this, it felt like emo music reconfigured into a black metal kind of production and aesthetic. Like a lot, it's kind of like the assessment you were making of the Countess Bathory album, in terms of like a lot of the melodies were going for a sense of poppy euphoria. A lot of them were very lyrical and circular, and not the kind of things that I go for in metal. There's that post-metal aspect to it as well, where it's clearly trying to evoke a sense of emotional catharsis, which just immediately turns me off. I don't think that black metal is suited for that kind of like emotional expression, and I really, really despise it when they kind of trivialize black metal in that sense. And this was kind of sold as one of the best like DSBM albums going, and I think the reason is because it is the most varied. Like, it does try to be bouncy and experiments with different pitches and things, but I think that in a sense that makes it worse. I think DSBM, if you're gonna do that style, I know it's not it's quite a derided style, but if you're going to do it well, it should be really monotonous. It should be really painful and hard to get through, because it's supposed to be a really painful and traumatic style of music. So it should be like Xasper. I don't like Xasper, by the way. I find them really tedious, but at least he makes a point of being really, really like unlistenable, whereas this tries to ingratiate itself like a pop song would. So yeah, I totally agree with the F. I did not enjoy this at all. So yeah, Roman, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, to be honest, this is not what I made it to either. So you guys make your decision on it.
Cool. Okay. So this next one, Into Oblivion. Have you heard of these guys, Roman?
Yeah. You know, I've heard that name kicking around before.
So I selected this before I knew that you were joining the episode, because I was like, well, we're discussing Canadian black metal. Obviously, I was already aware of this. I reviewed it when it came out, and I rate it very, very highly, because I absolutely love this EP, although it is basically the length of an album. But it comes up on like Canadian black metal lists. Although before we started recording, Jason and I were discussing the fact that it's probably more on like the death metal side as far as like the riff language is concerned, but there is, there's that crossover with like say Graveland or something where it leans heavily into moments of folk music. There are riffs in there that are clearly obviously black metal as well, but that very, very long form, like monolithic kind of approach to composition that just, it's a bit like approaching a really, really weighty epic poem in a lot of ways, where you kind of have to slog through it, but it is worth it, and it is kind of like you find yourself caught up in the moment where it is just very, very massive. I'm sorry, I'm going to say a lot of nice things about this music, Roman, so sorry if this gets a little bit sycophantic, but it was
I'll counterbalance it. Don't worry.
Okay. It was one of my picks for the year. I think was it 2019 or 2020?
We released that in 2020, I believe. Yeah, it was 2020.
Yeah. So it was one of my picks for that year. But it's that sense of like, it is very, very laboured, and you do kind of have to sit with it and kind of let it kind of swirl around for a little bit before you kind of fully grasp what's quite going on. I remember the first time I listened to it, and it's quite as with a lot of your music, it's very kind of rough around the edges. You kind of get the sense that it's like it is very kind of garage band, but then the compositions kind of compound on themselves, and suddenly they evolve into something else, and they become this much grander kind of statement. A little bit like Summoning in a lot of ways, where it can be very kind of start from a very basic place and then slowly build into something that is just like watching. It's very cinematic, I guess would be the word. And I love the way that sometimes these very ordered, organized death metal riffs kind of slowly devolve or dissolve into these very kind of ethereal violin segments or acoustic guitars with just these droning doom riffs underneath. I think this is absolutely exceptional. I wouldn't necessarily say it's black metal. It's black metal adjacent, but it's on here for a reason. So I would definitely have to put it up there with the Blasphemy and the Frozen Shadows. But I get the sense that Jason wants to be a bit more. I don't know if you want to talk about it, Roman, or would that just be a bit weird?
I'll only add one thing in. I mean, like, I'll just say that when you listen to the album, it's very clear that, the first two songs are more. The first song is death black metal. The second song is more straight death metal, and then the third song is pretty much just a black metal song. That's how I look at it. So it's kind of like. Yeah, so the last song, Eagle of the Serpent Sun, I mean, I wrote that as a black metal song, so that was the intent I had for it.
All right.
Yeah, I can see that.
Am I up? Is it my turn?
You're up.
So, Robin, I like you as a friend.
Ooh, that bad, eh?
And we may have some theological disagreements, but it doesn't. I don't hold it against you, and we can get into that later at some point. But
we still have to do that episode, right?
Yeah. I don't believe Christians should be in metal, personally. That's my 2 cents. We can get into that later. Perhaps a whole episode dedicated to that. So I do think Into Oblivion is pregnant with a lot of great ideas. And the execution, however, I would say, does not realize the what it could become, the potential that there is in the music. I hear a lot of good things going on that does remind me of an Axis of Advance and Demolic, and even one part I hear Demolic or Demolich, however you pronounce that. However, there's too much going on. I never get this real firm statement of what the expression truly is. I hear a lot of influences in there. I hear a lot of odd choices for key signatures, like the song starts out on one key and goes flat all of a sudden. And when we talk about like Western music, that's a no-no. When, I would say I would give it a C because it is average in my opinion, but it is very pregnant with a lot of ideas, and if they're fully realized, in later output that you have, it could perhaps turn into something truly wonderful. But as it is, from what I've heard so far, I would say it squanders the potential. So it's a C rating from Jason.
No, that's fair.
Well, that averages to a B because I would give it an A. I think it's Into Oblivion's best work. And whilst I sympathise with some of Jason's points in that it is big, like Into Oblivion and Chromlech to some extent as well. They're big compositions, and there's a lot to take in. And I've always got a sense of efficiency within composition, but I think on this EP in particular, it's kind of earned in a lot of ways, and it does pay off. But yeah. Cordial disagreement is what it's all about. So,
hey, I'm happy enough with the
not
beat.
talking personally, or just objectively looking at the music and what I thought of it. So
I'd be insulted if you did anything else, man.
I think there's potential there, Roman, and I look forward to what you do in the future, and hopefully it resonates with me more than what I've experienced so far. So go ahead, Shelley.
Moving on, we've got Mitochondrion. I think it's called Parasignosis.
So this one, throw it off. This should not be on the fucking black metal Canadian tier list. It's Disso Death.
So I remember listening to this album when it came out, and no, I do agree. Like re-listening to it now, it is sort of like Portal tech death stuff. But I remember it being a huge deal back in the early 2010s in terms of like that new style of black metal that it kind of we blame Deathspell Amiga primarily for that, but that dissonant black death metal with like the industrial aesthetic, and it's got really really tired by this point, but it is still popular for some reason, and this was one of the formative albums for that. And yeah, I remember trying to sort of give this a pass back in the day when I was younger and trying to sort of re-engage with what current contemporary metal was doing. I remember in the early 2010s, I was very disillusioned with what metal was. I didn't know if I was going to listen to it anymore, and I tried to re-engage with the sort of scene around me and go to gigs more. And this was one of the chief sort of styles that was really popular alongside like Stoner Doom. So I made a real effort to get into this kind of thing alongside Stoner Doom. And then it's like, yeah, a couple of years out, I was like, fuck all this. I'm going back to what I know I actually like. And then, yeah, revisiting it after at least a decade in prep for this episode, I was like, yeah, this is it's quite bad. I don't know if you have anything more intellectual to say about it, but I've never listened to so much information and activity and effort for so much nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I would have rated it as enough because it doesn't belong on this list. Um, it's Disso Death.
Yeah, no, it comes under well when you Google like it comes under Canadian black metal, but I totally agree with you, Jason, in that it's not really a black metal album. It has vague aesthetics to it, but yeah, it's this that horrible technical dissonant death metal style. So yeah, absolutely, yeah, have to.
I don't think it should be on this list, but yeah, we'll just put it in.
Yeah,
Roman, what do you think?
yeah, give it an F. I remember this band was very popular once upon a time. I don't know if that still is the case. I don't think they've done anything in a while, but yeah, it's just like it's a wash of a mess of a band. I mean, it's not good, not good at all. Really, not much to say about it, to be honest. I never liked this band.
Cool. Moving on. Monarque. I might have to withdraw my vote on this one because I listened to one of their albums. It was not this one the other week, and I remember sort of being a bit lukewarm towards it. This one struck me as slightly stronger, but I
It's a D.
listened to it about an hour ago. Sorry.
It's a D.
Okay, Jason, I'll let you expound on it because I don't really have anything intelligent to say on it.
Well, my first exposure to it, it was very generic Dark Throne type of riffing, and that's been done to death already. There's nothing original about it. I wouldn't even say it's really average because it's just kind of there. I think the production on this was better than a lot of the other albums that are on here, but still, production doesn't mean shit if the music isn't good. But yeah, it's a D from Jason. Yeah, the note I wrote on this is lots of generic Dark Throne clone riffing. We need to come up with a term for Dark Throne clones. We have Encanto clone.
Dark clones.
Dark.
Dark Clone, yeah, surely.
Yeah, like it's a dark clone band, and there's like 1,000 of those out there, and yeah, it's just nothing. It's competent in being a clone band, but that's why it's not enough. But yeah, it's a D. Nothing really original going on with the music. Roman.
You know what? I think D is probably a fair assessment, so I'll agree. I know that they got another release, an EP called Jusque la Mort or whatever it is, and it has as a guest musician on there the guy from Sorcier de Glace. And it's funny because that band, Sorcier de Glace, always emphasizes how they don't use keyboards at all. He just gets around it by using guitar with a lot of effects. But on that EP, he does keyboards, which is kind of funny. I would actually say if anybody wanted to check this band out, I would actually recommend that EP from 2019 more. Yeah, other than that, I would definitely say your assessment of a D is probably well earned.
Fair enough. Okay. Moving on.
We have Revenge.
Revenge.
Blood.
God, War Metal leaves me completely cold as well. Like, it's just Conqueror, but slightly worse for me. I maybe give it C, but probably D. It's that hardcore vocals mixed with the attempt to be a little bit destructive that doesn't really come off. And as I mentioned earlier, the context in which this was released, sort of early to mid 2000s, when people were trying desperately anything they could think of to try and make black metal that little bit more inaccessible. And for me, it's not about going route one and being really obvious about it in terms of just making it completely a cacophony of noise, doing what Blasphemy did, but more. You've got to think a little bit more about it, and that's why a band like, say, Antaios was so much more interesting to me than a Revenge. I get the place for, like, very, very grounded, very, very, like, energetic grindcore based music, and I do. There is a place for that. I just don't think Revenge do it very, very well. So I think I'd rank it as a D.
I would rank it as a C personally, and like when we talk about like the most nihilistic type of music created, I think Revenge is in that conversation. And we can talk about Ildjarn and all that. Ildjarn actually being like a firm aesthetic, a statement. Uh, Revenge is more of, along the lines of just how knuckleheaded can you get and get away with it. Like I said, there is a good song on this album called "Blood of My Blood," and awesome fucking title. It's just like kingdom against kingdom. It just draws your attention to it. However, the musical content of Revenge seems like Conqueror leftovers. It's like anti-music. We talk about Ildjarn being anti-music. This is a different type of that where there's not like overarching. There is like a militant, aesthetic and all that where they try to be, in your face and genocide, nihilism, and all of that. But what comes from that, like what you experience as a human being, kind of becomes a wash a lot of the times with Revenge.
It strikes me as like Von did it so much better.
Well, Vaughn
In terms of just fancy music.
yeah, Vaughn had catchy tunes though. Like even though it was simplistic and barbaric, it was still catchy. Revenge doesn't have anything that's really catchy. I mean, Blood My Blood is a little bit catchy, but it's more just like the sonic terror. And yeah, I'm in between a C and a D. I think the gradation for war metal reached this peak with Blasphemy, and then went down to the Conqueror, and ended up in being a Revenge, and it got degraded over time, like lower on the gradation scale. Um, but yeah, there's some aspects of Revenge that on the surface I like a lot, but when it comes to the actual music content, it doesn't really deliver. And some people listen to this shit nonstop. I have no idea how. Like, how the fuck do their brains work? Like, it just makes me question their like psychologically, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like,
They should donate their brains to science to see.
it's like, are there no neurotransmitters firing up? Like, what the fuck is going on? But I do like knuckleheaded music, but this takes it to the extreme where it's not even music. And being that I am someone who appreciates music, it there's more faults than strengths for me. Roman, what are your thoughts on your Canadian brethren,
Yeah,
Revenge?
so I think C is completely fair. I'll also say that like Revenge is a band that I feel like what I would need to have is a best of album because there's always like a couple of songs I like from each album or a couple songs that do something cool, but like I can rarely make it through a whole album of Revenge. It's just that's a feat in of itself right there. I think that if I was going to pick one of the releases, this actually wouldn't be the one I would have picked.
I would have gone a little further down. I think they get a little better with Infiltration, Downfall, Death, and Scum Collapse, Eradication is actually the one that I think they did their best on, because that one they really broke up the formula with more of the slow parts and the mid-paced parts, and those ones were really like crushing and punishing and nihilistic, and I really like that. This album, not so much, but I think a C is a fair assessment.
Fair enough. I see it shall stay. This next one, Sombre Forêt, or Sombre Forêt. I'm assuming it just means Sombre Forest.
Yes, pretty much.
Okay, just being twat English guy. Again, this is an album that was recommended to me many, many years ago following, I think it was because I was listening to Frozen Shadows and I was like, go on, Jason. Yeah, okay, all right. We'll get to it, Jason. Let me just give a bit of backstory. I was looking for other, wintry black metal bands from Canada, and I was, again, mid-2000s, early to mid-2000s, the internet was not what it is today. It was not the slick recommendation algorithm-driven machine that it is. And it just said, you like Frozen Shadows, here's another black metal band from Canada. And, this album came up, Quintessence, and I was like, yeah, it's okay. Completely forgot about it, and then just doing, again, research for this episode, I was like, oh, I remember them. I'll give it another listen. And yes, it is just one of the worst, not one of the worst things I've ever heard, but it is pretty fucking terrible in terms of, it is basically DSBM, but trying to be a wintry version of that, but it mixes in really, really horrible elements of post-metal into it, where it just plods along at, 80 BPM with these hammed-up, emotive, high-pitched vocals and really, really trivial, uninteresting, melodic shapes. So yeah, I was very disappointed by the fact that it does not hold up. Does anyone want to add anything other than that?
Yeah, this is fucking shitty as hell. That's here. I'm laughing. But...
I love your emphatic statements. They're great. I mean, it's just like, oh man.
No, it's a shitty fucking Csejthe ripoff. Yeah, F tier.
Yeah, no further comments and no arguments.
No,
it can stay enough.
Next album,
Sorcier de Glace. This is Snowland. So we talked about these guys on the podcast before. We did Moonrise and Total Darkness, which is an album that I absolutely love as well. I think that is this guy. I think his lyrics are cheesy as hell, and I find it hard to take them seriously, especially on after the Purest Supremacy Forest or whatever the fuck it's called. But in the earlier albums, you can't really hear the lyrics, which is fine by me because he's a terrible lyricist. But in terms of melody, he's very, very good at constructing slightly longer form melodies that you only really see in early Immortal, and as I mentioned to some extent, Frozen Shadows. And it's interesting what you were saying, Roman, earlier on about the fact that he does not use keyboards, but he uses guitars to create the effects that you would have on a keyboard. Because I always see him as I wouldn't say symphonic black metal, but symphonic adjacent in the fact that he does use what sounds like keyboards to very much drive some of these pieces forward.
Yes.
But he can get away with that because he is a very, very good constructor of melody by the standards of late 90s, early 2000s black metal. He really knows how to drive home a particular melodic sentence, and actually it resolves itself in a way that is very, very intuitive, and you don't really see it often in black metal as a whole. I'd say outside of Morbid Angel, in fact, you don't see it in extreme metal that much. And he doesn't he's released quite a lot of albums since then, and he hasn't managed to kind of keep it up. But I would say Snowland, Moonrise and Total Darkness, to some extent, the Purest and Supremacy Forest as well. All those albums have moments where he does reach for that. I don't think he's kind of consistent in that regard, but definitely on this album, it's up there in terms of just very, very sweeping, very, very engaging forms of melody. But he kind of meshes that with the really, really striking atmosphere of very frigid, feral black metal. And for that reason, again, the best of the bands that we've been talking about, it is kind of continuing the legacy of your early Emperor, to some extent your Graveland and Immortal as well, and really kind of zooming in on a particular aspect and just carrying it forward. Again, much like the Frozen Shadows, I think I prefer the Frozen Shadows, but much like that, it's not quite there. It just needs that little bit of extra zing to make it like genius. But for me, it's still up there. So I think I'd rank this album an A. What do you guys think?
I agree. Sorcerer the Gloss has been one of the projects that I've discovered in the past 15 years. Been listening to metal forever, and that's really impressed me. Great song construction, great coherence. Yeah, it's not as original as a Burzum or any of that, but it's one guy just pounding out quality black metal. Granted, in recent years, the quality has very much waned where it comes to Sorcerer to Gloss. But this is back when the project was really strong, and like if more bands had the fortitude to approach song construction and riffcraft as well as Robbie did with this album, metal would be in a better state nowadays. Really good album. I do kind of agree. Like the Frozen Shadows, I would place it side by side with that, and that's a really high ranking from Jason. I did enjoy it quite a bit. That Frozen Shadows, and the Sorcerer the Gloss is a band that has disappointed me recently with their later output, but their original material is very strong. Yeah, strong A from Jason. Roman.
I will maybe go so far as to say that I might even like it a little bit better than Frozen Shadows, to be honest. I fell in love with this band the first time I heard them back when I was in high school. And like, yeah, it's Snowland was, I think that was really the first album I heard. Amazing. Like, amazing. The sense of melody and the song construction is just, for a band, it was one of those things that, like, when you're going through metal at that time period and you realize that all the older stuff is way better than the newer stuff, Sorcier de Glace was one of these bands that gave you that hope. It's like, oh, there's still good metal being put out. And yeah, they've gotten a lot cheesier lately for sure. The quality hasn't really kept up, but they've never really gotten terrible.
They did an album that was all one song, like a full album that's all one song. And you want to talk about over?
Yes, it's like
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I forgot about that too.
Complete fucking trash.
I mean,
but it's
like at that point, no, that's not one song. That's an album, and you just called it a song instead. Like, it's like
yeah, I agree.
But I would absolutely give this an A.
Great. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I totally agree with the fact that this being a slightly later album, it gives me that faith that, oh no, it's still possible to work in this language and create something that is approaching profundity. It's not all in the past.
Absolutely.
They're one of the exceptions that proves the rule.
I will just add in one last thing, if that's okay. It's just I always found his characterization of his music as being primitive is kind of funny. Because I don't really see it as that primitive. I mean, it's pretty elegant sounding for the most part.
Yeah, no, actually, I agree with that, because he's always going on about misanthropy and primitivism and stuff, but I see him as like a successor to like early Emperor in some ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's like elegance incarnate as far as black metal is concerned.
Exactly.
So this last album is sort of our wild card last minute pick that Jason and I were just chatting before the episode, and we were saying the Departure Chandelier was one of the standout releases. I think it was released this year, actually. This is very recent, but they are...
It might be album of the year. It might be album of the year. It might be.
Well, it's still only... where are we? Oh, it's the last day of March. Well, we're not halfway through the year yet, but yeah. It is half Canadian, half from New York, I believe, this band. So it's not fully a Canadian effort, but we're counting it as such, not least because everything is in French. But this is like a cross between early Graveland and the best aspects of classic era Dark Throne. And much like a lot of the quality releases we discussed today, it's not doing anything original. You listen to it, it won't blow your mind, but it is reaching for that sense of the epic and that sense of narrative where it's not particularly technical. The production is like, I wouldn't say it's lo-fi in like the Ilshan sense, but it is very like rough and ready as far as like, just garage black metal is concerned. There are some really quality keyboard harmonies going on as well, but again, they're very, very simple. They're kind of just more augmenting what the guitars are doing, but all of that coalesces into something that's more than the sum of its parts as far as like telling a story, giving that sense of an epic journey going on, which is quite fitting for the subject matter of like, then Napoleon, and that kind of narrative of historical epics going on. And I just wanted to give it a little plug because Jason and I have been chatting about this album for a little bit, and it is one of the few albums that has kind of really caught our attention this year. But it's working in a very, very traditional style, and I kind of love the fact that, again, to the point about Sorcery to Glass, that this is a much more recent album, came out in the last few months, but still possible to kind of be very, very creative within styles that you kind of would assume are kind of beating a dead horse by this point and very stale. But yeah, this album does it. It's not going to blow your brains out, but it is up there as far as like, oh yeah, it's worth a few revisits. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Jason.
I might. So you kind of regurgitated some of the things I had said about it. And
sorry, I got them from osmosis, but yeah.
Yeah, it just resonated. But this is one of the stronger albums I've heard lately, and the integration of keyboards in it just adds an extra element where it's very naive music and it pulls it off. Like great black metal should be fucking naive, and it should just like you want to have a grandiose statement and just like tell the world to fuck off, but you're not really capable of doing it in like the most like sophisticated form. That is true fucking black metal in my opinion. And it's very intuitive. Like you have to have like a great sense of intuition to be able to pull off a lot of the things that go on in this album. It's a strong B from Jason. I think this band has a lot of fucking potential after this album. Granted, their first album I'd probably place around a D, honestly. It was just nothing. But this one, there's like a lot of different elements, a lot of different things going on and revolving around each other that it was a really great experience listening to. Now, I do think it could be performed much better and more refined and all of that, but yeah, overall, it's above average. I wouldn't say it's up there at Blasphemy yet, perhaps with their next album, but there's a lot of great things going on in this album, and it seems really intuitive, and that's the main thing going for me. It could be knuckleheaded as shit, but as long as there's like a intuitive thread that unites everything in a cohesive way, it's good stuff. That makes sense. Like you listen to it, it's like, oh, I see what they're doing here, I see what they're doing there, and it's a really good experience. Roman, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so as you can tell, there were a bunch I didn't listen to, and this wasn't on the list when I saw it initially, so I didn't check it out. I'll say about Departure Chandelier, I will say this, just kind of as a funny aside right here. This band has always been very funny to me for a number of reasons. A, the name. B, the fact that they're obsessed with Napoleon. And it's funny because it kind of goes back to what Shelley was talking about earlier, like black metal trying ideas that haven't been tried or whatever, kind of looking for niches and nooks and things that haven't been exploited yet. Well, it's just like somebody just kind of got the idea. It's like, oh, somebody declared Napoleon the Antichrist at one point, so the most satanic symbol you can use on your album covers are paintings of Napoleon. Well, so it's kind of it's a pretty funny logic when you think about it, but kudos, makes sense.
As a shameless plug, I do dig into that idea on my review of this album on Hate Meditations, just a little bit. I want to unpack it a little bit more, but I wanted to review the actual music on there. But I did pick up on that as like every single, not just black metal, but a lot of extreme metal in general is looking for that little niche. I kind of, ever since Nile decided that they were Egyptologists, it's like, what's our little thing that we can, a little historical and mythological thing that we can write music around? And I quite like the idea that they've not just picked up on Napoleon, but they're not doing it with like using cheesy, like French folk music or whatever.
Right.
They're actually doing it with quite visceral black metal, but they get it across in some way.
I will say this. I played guitar since I was 12. I haven't played in probably 10 years. I did start playing bass again last year and wasn't really rusty at all. So I heard that Departure Chandelier, and that makes me want to make black metal again because I think I can do something better than that. Like, it inspired me. So good music inspires people. So definitely above average. I wouldn't say it's really an A yet. Perhaps with their next album, but I think the goodness of it is present in the music. Like, this very cohesive songwriting with the keyboards being implemented. It's a great experience. I wouldn't place it as an A though.
So, yeah, I think in terms of praise, the fact that it has inspired you to write some music is probably the highest that it could come. I couldn't give it an A because I don't think I could rank it above Into Oblivion, which I think is the stronger album. But they both end up for B, but they're both in that territory of like music that gives me faith that there is still potential within this form of music, whether it be black metal or death metal that's kind of adjacent to it as well. And I think that, not to be too corny and round things off, but I think that is kind of like the lesson that I have taken away from this very deep dive into Canadian black metal is, yes, there is some tripe, as you can see from the DNF tier, but what these bands did in terms of like very sort of loose, disconnected kind of scene, aside from, your Conqueror and your Revenge and stuff. But even that, which I have been quite derisive of in this episode, is I appreciate them for carrying the baton and trying to push the boundaries of what black metal could do after the original second wave had kind of run out of steam, and someone else had to pick up the threads and say, okay, where can we take this music next? And Canada was one of the key places where that happened, in terms of like, just keep on pushing it forward. And sometimes it doesn't always come off, but you've got to appreciate the effort. And yeah, bands like Into Oblivion and Departure Chandelier, and I know you disagree with this, Jason, but I think Délétère belong in that as well, and Sorcerer's Glass to some extent as well. Just carrying it forward, and just as you said, like, if they inspire someone else to pick up a guitar and maybe do it slightly better, then all the better as well. So. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyable episode for me. Sorry to be so corny there, but those are my closing thoughts.
I had a great time. I had fun too. It's good to have another ranking. It's been a while since we've done this with me on here, and Roman, of course. Roman, I want to thank you very much for joining. I know you had the church stuff today.
Not a secret to anybody who knows me, but at any rate, no, thank you so much for having me on. This was really fun. This is a good time, and heck, if I had a little more advanced prep next time, I'd actually try to listen to every album.
Well, yeah, no, I've really appreciated your insights today, and yeah, if we get to do another episode somewhere down the line, if we can agree another tier list, then yeah, it'd be absolutely awesome to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the commentary on the Into Oblivion stuff. I'll just say that we are still active. We're still writing. We have a third song now for the new album.
So what's that? It's about 2 hours long.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's still going. The Cromlech successor project, Mormagil, is still going, and me and my buddy Kevin, not the vocalist in Mormagil and Cromlech, but a different one. We're working on a neoclassical dungeon synth thing. Well, we've been doing that for a long time, actually. It's just.
Have you heard of Garden Gnome?
Sorry. Oh, Garden. Oh man. Yeah.
Can you top me with Garden Gnome? Let's see. We can do a battle of the bands with Dungeon Synth.
Oh man, that might.
Let's do a Dungeon Synth tier list at some point.
Yeah, that would be funny, actually.
All right, I've enjoyed the conversation thoroughly. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, great time, guys.
Thank you very much.